A metal toolbox floated ominously on the quiet waters of the Champlain Canal on that summer day in 2005. Inside, a horrific secret had been hidden for 3 months: the body of Lori Leonard, a 33-year-old single mother, brutally bound and gagged. But this was no random act by a madman. 9 years earlier, a college student named Cece Opanowski had narrowly escaped the clutches of the same predator. Could her survival have prevented the tragedy that followed? Why did the justice system allow a dangerous, violent offender to remain free on the streets? How did Sean Doyle, or Sean as he had renamed himself, evolve from an attacker into a killer? A small key in his glove compartment would become the fateful clue. The courageous testimony of surviving women would expose the true face of the monster. For no matter how long darkness may prevail, truth always finds its way to the light, and justice, however delayed, will ultimately be served. In the summer of 2005, the golden rays of July sunshine bathed the peaceful countryside of Kingsbury, where the Champlain Canal flowed quietly through verdant fields. This was one of those beautiful days common to Washington County, New York. The kind of weather that made people want to venture outdoors to enjoy nature, go fishing, or simply take a stroll along the canal banks. But July 24th would not be remembered for its serene beauty. Instead, it would mark the beginning of one of the most complex criminal investigations ever to unfold in this region. A local fisherman, who had become familiar with these waterways over many decades, was rowing his small boat along the canal near the bridge spanning Loch 9. He had experienced countless similar mornings, hoping to catch a few fish for dinner, but something unusual floating on the water's surface caught his attention. Initially, the fisherman thought it was just an ordinary toolbox, perhaps fallen from the back of someone's pickup truck due to carelessness. Items falling into the water weren't uncommon in this area, where numerous bridges and roadways ran alongside the canal. But as he rowed closer to investigate, a putrid, nauseating odor began to penetrate the fresh morning air. The large metal box was securely locked, but the stench rising from it was unmistakably strong. This wasn't the smell of old tools or rusted metal. This was the smell of something entirely different. Something that a person with rural living experience like him could immediately recognize. An uneasy feeling crept into the fisherman's heart as he realized he might have discovered something terrible. Not daring to open the box himself, the fisherman quickly rowed back to shore and contacted the authorities. His emergency call was relayed through multiple levels of the local law enforcement system, and before long, the sounds of police cars and ambulances had pierced the tranquility of the peaceful countryside. Detective Wade Irwin, one of the most veteran investigators with the Washington County Police Department, was the first to arrive at the scene. With over 20 years of experience in law enforcement, he had witnessed many horrific sights, but the smell emanating from the toolbox floating on the water made even a seasoned professional like him prepare mentally for the worst. The forensic police team was summoned to assist in safely retrieving and opening the box. They established a security perimeter around the area, ensuring that the potential crime scene would be preserved for later investigation. Tension enveloped the entire group as they prepared to unlock the mysterious box. When the sound of metal-cutting tools rang out in the quiet afternoon air, everyone held their breath in anticipation. The large toolbox, made of thick and sturdy metal, seemed to have been specifically designed to conceal its secret. When the lid was finally opened, even the most veteran officers had to step back and cover their mouths and noses. Inside the cold metal box was a sight that none of them would ever forget. A young woman had been placed inside in the most cruel manner imaginable. The victim's body had been tightly bound with items that would later become crucial evidence in the investigation. Detective Irwin, who had witnessed many crime scenes throughout his career, later shared that this scene was among the most unforgettable. The victim had been bound behind her back with metal handcuffs, with duct tape wrapped around them to ensure even tighter restraint. Her legs were also bound together with duct tape, rendering the victim completely unable to move. The most terrifying aspect of this scene was the victim's face. From forehead to chin, the entire face had been covered with duct tape, creating a horrific mask that concealed the identity of this unfortunate woman. When forensic experts carefully removed the layers of duct tape, they discovered that underneath was a bandana tightly knotted in the victim's mouth. The entire body had been carefully wrapped in a blanket, seemingly to completely hide the victim from light and the outside world. The toolbox had been weighted down with multiple sandbags, a detail showing that the perpetrator had meticulously planned to ensure the box would sink to the bottom of the canal and never be discovered. But nature had other calculations. The natural decomposition process had created gases that increased the box's buoyancy. Combined with currents created by propellers from passing boats, the box had finally surfaced after many weeks submerged at the bottom of the canal. Detective Irwin stood looking at the scene with countless questions flooding his mind. Who was this woman? What had she endured in her final moments? Who could be cruel enough to commit such an evil act? And most importantly, was this perpetrator still free out there, capable of committing other crimes? These questions would drive a complex and lengthy investigation, one that would involve more than 750 interviews, 280 leads to follow, and cooperation between multiple law enforcement agencies from local to federal levels. This investigation would also reveal a story about the escalation of violence, about missed opportunities to prevent tragedy, and about the extraordinary strength of survivors when they decide to speak out for justice. As forensic experts carefully moved the body to conduct an examination, Detective Irwin knew this was only the beginning of a long journey to seek the truth. That cold metal toolbox had hidden its secret for many weeks. But now, under the sunshine of a summer afternoon, that secret had finally been revealed. The scene was carefully sealed off, every detail meticulously documented and photographed. Every fragment, every trace could be the key to solving this mystery. And meanwhile, somewhere out there, a perpetrator still believed that his perfect crime would never be discovered. To understand the origin of the horrific crime just discovered at the Champlain Canal, we need to turn back time 9 years to a cold winter in the town of Hudson Falls. It was January 1996 when an 18-year-old college student named Cece Opanowski was enjoying winter break after her first semester at university. Cece was an introverted, gentle girl who had just experienced the difficult early months of adjusting to college life in suburban New York. She had broken up with her boyfriend, Sean Doyle, about 4 months earlier, a decision she thought would bring her freedom and peace. But Sean Doyle was not the type of person to easily accept rejection. Doyle and Cece had grown up together in Hudson Falls, a relationship that began in high school and continued into her first year of college. However, what initially seemed like young love had gradually transformed into a toxic relationship, filled with control and jealousy from Doyle's side. Cece had realized that she needed to escape this relationship to be able to develop herself and focus on her studies. That weekend, Cece's mother went away, leaving the large house to her and her close friend Shannon McAuliffe. Shannon was a vivacious, cheerful girl full of energy, completely opposite to Cece's introverted personality. It was Shannon who had helped Cece come out of her shell and become more confident during those early months at college. The two girls had planned a relaxing evening, what they called a girls' night. They lit a fire in the fireplace, turned on the excellent sound system that Cece's parents had invested in, and danced to their favorite songs. It was precious time when Cece felt she could truly be free and happy without worrying about pressure from anyone. However, this peace didn't last long. Cece's cell phone, a device that was still quite novel at that time, continuously rang with calls from Sean Doyle. He wanted to know what the two girls were doing, wanted to know if he could come join them, and became increasingly annoyed when Cece refused. Shannon, with the keen intuition of a true friend, advised Cece to turn off the phone so they could enjoy the evening without being disturbed. But Cece refused, for a reason that would later prove to be completely correct. If she turned off the phone, Sean would come directly to the house. Cece understood Doyle's controlling and impulsive nature better than anyone else. The evening passed in a combination of joy and tension. Each time the phone rang, the atmosphere in the house became a bit heavier. Shannon could sense Cece's increasing anxiety, even though her friend tried to hide it and continue having fun as if nothing was happening. Finally, the two girls went to sleep, hoping that the next morning would bring peace. They slept late, as young girls typically do during vacation, and when they woke up, they simply wanted to go out for coffee and enjoy the new day. Shannon, always concerned about her appearance, decided to go home to change clothes before going out. She told Cece she couldn't go out in public looking disheveled like that. Cece agreed to stay home and wait for Shannon to return, and the two girls would go for coffee together afterward. After Shannon left, Cece was alone in the large house. She spent time cleaning up, watching TV, and relaxing in the way a teenager typically does when they have free time. The atmosphere in the house was quiet and peaceful, completely opposite to what was about to happen. A knock at the door broke the morning silence. Cece, not expecting Shannon to return so early, hurried to open the door without thinking to check who was standing outside. When the door opened, instead of Shannon's cheerful face, Cece saw Sean Doyle standing there with a stern expression. Doyle told Cece that he just wanted to talk to her. His tone initially seemed normal, even somewhat pleading. Cece, although feeling uncomfortable, still decided to let him into the house. It was a decision she would regret for the rest of her life. The moment he crossed the threshold, Sean Doyle seemed to transform into a completely different person. His falsely gentle facade disappeared, replaced by a cruel and deranged expression. Cece immediately realized she had made a serious mistake. Doyle pushed Cece onto the sofa, beginning to pin her down with his superior strength. He berated her with words full of hatred and anger, words that an 18-year-old girl should never have to hear. The strength in Doyle's lanky body rendered Cece completely helpless. Then Doyle lifted Cece up and forcefully pushed her against the French doors at the end of the living room. The sound of Cece's body hitting the glass echoed through the quiet house, but Doyle didn't stop there. He continued pushing her against the glass doors repeatedly, each impact carrying the risk that the glass might break and cause serious injury to Cece. The most terrible thing was yet to come. Cece had beautiful long hair, usually tied in a neat ponytail. Doyle, in his sick rage, decided to take away from Cece what she valued most. He lifted her up, held her firmly in a helpless position, and took scissors to cut off her ponytail. In an instant, the hair that Cece had nurtured for many years completely disappeared. This was not just physical violence, but also an attack on Cece's dignity and identity. Later, when asked about her feelings, Cece described this as complete humiliation. But the horror wasn't over yet. Doyle continued to choke Cece, making her struggle to breathe and panic. Then, in the most terrifying moment, he brought the scissors close to her neck. Cece, in absolute panic, thought she was about to be stabbed to death. She could feel the cold blade against the skin of her neck and knew that just one slight movement of Doyle's hand would end her life immediately. Throughout this brutal attack, the phone in the house continuously rang. Each ring was like a reminder that the outside world continued to function normally, while Cece was experiencing ultimate horror. Doyle, despite being in a rage, was still alert enough to realize that not answering the phone could attract unwanted attention. Cece, with remarkable intelligence in extremely dangerous circumstances, explained to Doyle that if she didn't answer the phone, her mother would worry and might call the police. Doyle, recognizing the logic in this argument, allowed Cece to answer the phone, but he closely monitored every word she said. When Cece picked up the phone, she heard the familiar and worry-filled voice of Shannon McAuliffe. Shannon was calling to check in and see if Cece was ready to go for coffee. But immediately, Shannon realized that something was completely wrong with her friend's tone. Cece, in a desperate attempt to call for help without letting Doyle realize it, began answering Shannon's questions in an unusual pattern. She continuously used the word no in her responses, while pretending to do housework by opening the dishwasher and creating noise. Shannon, who understood Cece's personality and way of speaking, immediately realized that something extremely wrong was happening. Shannon McAuliffe, with the sharp intuition of a true friend, asked the crucial question, "Is he there?" Cece, knowing this might be her only chance to get help, answered clearly, "Yes." Right after that, she hung up, leaving Shannon with full understanding of the dangerous situation her friend was facing. Shannon McAuliffe didn't hesitate for a second. She immediately dialed Hudson Falls Police and reported the emergency situation. She explained to the dispatcher that her friend was in danger and needed immediate help. Thanks to Shannon's quick thinking and courage, the wheels of justice began to turn to rescue Cece. When Hudson Falls Police arrived at the scene, they ended the brutal attack. However, their handling of this situation left deep psychological wounds on Cece. Instead of handcuffing Doyle and taking him away immediately, they placed both Cece and her attacker in the same police car. This made Cece feel as if she was also being treated like a criminal. Worse yet, at the police station, instead of separating the two to gather independent statements, police questioned Cece and Doyle simultaneously in the same room. This not only violated standard procedures, but also made Cece feel unsafe and unprotected. She had the feeling that police viewed the entire incident as a fight between two kids that got slightly dark rather than a serious assault. Finally, Sean Doyle was arrested and charged with threatening, harassment, and unlawful entry. However, the punishment he received was only the minimum. He pleaded guilty to second-degree menacing and was sentenced to 3 years probation. For Cece, this sentence did not properly reflect the severity of what she had endured. After this incident, Cece Opanowski made a decision that changed her life. She transferred colleges and left Hudson Falls far behind, determined to start over somewhere Sean Doyle couldn't find her. She hoped that by moving far enough away and cutting off all contact, she could forget the trauma and rebuild her life. For many years afterward, Cece lived with the secret fear that Doyle might come looking for her again. She changed her daily routines, avoided public places where he might appear, and remained constantly vigilant about her surroundings. The trauma from the attack affected every aspect of her life, from personal relationships to career choices and where she lived. But Cece thought she had escaped Sean Doyle forever. She believed that with time, he would forget about her and move on to other victims, or perhaps change his character and become a better person. This was a naive belief that many violence survivors often harbor, the hope that their attacker will change themselves and not harm anyone else. However, what Cece didn't know at the time was that Sean Doyle hadn't changed at all. Instead, he was learning from his mistakes in the attack against her, perfecting his techniques and methods. 3 years of probation gave him enough time to reflect on what had happened and plan for future actions. During this time, Doyle exhibited similar behavior toward other women. In 2000, just 4 years after attacking Cece, he was charged with another attack against a young woman named Sarah Volmar. In this case, Doyle used more sophisticated methods, tying the victim with shoelaces, gagging her with duct tape, and choking her until she lost consciousness. Fortunately, Sarah's mother intervened in time and saved her daughter's life. Sean Doyle's criminal pattern was becoming clear. He targeted young women he could access through personal relationships, used trust to approach them, then applied increasingly sophisticated methods of restraint and control. Each attack was a lesson for the next attack, and the level of violence was escalating alarmingly. But all of this was still in the future in 1996. At that time, Cece Opanowski was just a young student trying to rebuild her life after a terrible trauma, and Sean Doyle was just a young man who had received a light sentence for his violent behavior. No one could have imagined that 9 years later, this story would have a much bloodier and more tragic next chapter. 9 years after the brutal attack on Cece Opanowski, Sean Doyle, who had now changed his name to Sean M. Doyle, had become a seemingly ordinary 30-year-old man living in Hudson Falls. On the surface, he appeared to have stabilized his life with a job at a local ice cream shop and no longer caused the troubles of his youth. However, beneath this normal facade, Doyle's violent and controlling tendencies had not disappeared, but were silently developing in a more dangerous direction. In 2003, as the internet began changing how people communicated and dated, Doyle discovered a new tool for finding potential victims: The dating website Cupid.com, one of the first online platforms of its kind, opened up to him an entirely new world with countless opportunities to approach single, vulnerable women. It was on this platform that Doyle met Lori Leonard, a 33-year-old woman living in Chittenango, a small town outside Syracuse, about a 3-hour drive from Hudson Falls. Lori was a single mother raising 2 sons, 9-year-old Austin and 5-year-old Zachary, and was seeking a serious relationship that could bring stability to her small family. Lori Leonard was born on September 14, 1971 in Syracuse, the daughter of Barbara Sloan and Donald Leonard. She grew up in a loving family alongside her sister Jennifer Leonard and brother Jeffrey Leonard. Jennifer, a few years older than Lori, always played the role of a second mother, protecting and guiding her sister through life. Lori was a woman full of life, cheerful and humorous. She had a deep love for her family and especially devoted all her heart to raising her 2 sons. Austin, the older son, remembered his mother as someone who was always caring and nurturing, always ready to spend quality time with her children. Zachary, the younger son, described life with his mother as overflowing with love and affection. Lori's greatest dream was to find a stable home for her family, a good partner who could serve as a stepfather to her children, and to build the happy life she called the white picket fence, a symbol of the traditional American dream. Jennifer Leonard later shared that her sister always yearned to have a complete and stable family. When meeting Doyle on the dating website, Lori initially felt hopeful. Doyle presented himself as a mature, stable man with a job and ready to commit to a serious relationship. He skillfully concealed his violent past and created the image of a trustworthy man. However, the relationship between Lori and Doyle quickly revealed concerning signs. Jennifer Leonard recalled one night when she called her sister and heard Doyle yelling at Lori in the background. That sound made Jennifer feel uneasy and wonder what kind of person her sister was dating. Doyle exhibited extreme controlling and jealous behaviors that Lori might have initially mistaken for care and love. He wanted to know all her activities, who she talked to, and where she was at all times. When Lori dated other men, Doyle secretly followed her, behavior he later admitted to Dorothy Tucker, a friend who had once trusted him. Dorothy Tucker, a local woman who had known Doyle for many years, initially stood by him when later accusations emerged. She recalled that Doyle had told her about following Lori when she went on dates with others. When Tucker advised him to stop this behavior and said that Lori didn't want to continue the relationship, Doyle seemed to agree. However, Tucker later admitted that she didn't see the real monster hidden inside Doyle, and that he had concealed it very well. Although the relationship between Lori and Doyle had ended, they still maintained contact as friends. This wasn't uncommon in modern relationships, but in this case, it created an opportunity for Doyle to continue maintaining a presence in Lori's life. He skillfully maintained the role of a good friend, ready to help when needed. In April of 2005, Lori decided to move from her old apartment to a new rental house in Chittenango. This was an important step in her life, representing a fresh start and hope for a better future for her small family. Dustin Delatorre, Lori's 15-year-old nephew, helped her move and recalled that his aunt seemed very cheerful and happy that day. When she needed help with the move, Lori contacted several people to borrow a truck. However, most were unable to help at the time she needed. Finally, Doyle volunteered to lend her his truck. Jennifer Leonard later shared that Doyle was her sister's last resort, and that he was still playing the role of a good friend. On April 29, 2005, the move went quite smoothly. Doyle not only lent Lori the truck, but also directly helped transport belongings. However, what bothered Lori was that after completing the move, Doyle decided to stay longer than expected. He found ways to extend his time at Lori's new house, seemingly unwilling to leave. Doyle's lingering presence made Lori feel uncomfortable and anxious. She shared with Jennifer that Doyle's refusal to go home was annoying her. Jennifer advised her sister to be firm and ask him to leave, but Lori worried that this might cause unnecessary conflict. 5 days after the move, on May 4, 2005, Lori finally told Jennifer that Doyle had agreed to leave. She felt relieved and excited about her plans for that day. Lori intended to drive to Albany to pick up New York Yankees game tickets from a colleague she had met at work. Before departing, Lori had taken her two sons, Austin and Zachary, to relatives' house for care. This was a normal routine when she needed to travel far or had personal business. The boys were accustomed to this, and there was nothing unusual about that day. Lori promised she would return home late and would pick up the children the next day. The journey to Albany from Chittenango usually took about 2 hours of driving on familiar roads that Lori had traveled many times. She planned to meet her colleague, pick up the tickets, and perhaps spend some time in Albany before driving home in the evening. Late in the afternoon on May 4th, Jennifer Leonard called her sister hoping to catch Lori on her way to Albany or while she was there. This was a routine call that the two sisters often made to keep in touch and share about their day. However, instead of hearing Lori's familiar, cheerful voice, Jennifer only heard the sound of voicemail. Jennifer felt slightly unusual, but initially wasn't too worried. Perhaps Lori was driving or busy with something in Albany. However, when she called back after an hour and the phone still went to voicemail, a feeling of worry began to emerge. Lori never missed calls from family, especially from Jennifer, without calling back within a short time. When night fell and Lori still didn't answer the phone, Jennifer knew something had happened. She tried calling many more times, but all went to voicemail. The worry turned to panic when Jennifer realized this wasn't characteristic behavior of her sister. The next morning, when Lori still hadn't appeared and couldn't be contacted, the family decided to call the police. Chief Jeffrey Paul of the Chittenango Police received the missing person report and began the initial investigation. He quickly realized there were two possibilities. Either Lori had left voluntarily, or someone had taken her and her belongings. Lori's car was found abandoned in the Syracuse area, but there was no sign she had reached Albany as planned. The colleague who had been waiting for her with the Yankees tickets also confirmed that Lori never appeared to collect them. This increased concerns that something terrible had happened to her. Police quickly focused on Sean Doyle as a person of interest in the disappearance. He was the last person known to have been with Lori, and the fact that he had helped her move just a few days earlier made him a legitimate suspect. Detective Wade Irwin and the investigation team summoned Doyle for questioning. When questioned, Doyle appeared cooperative and ready to answer questions. He affirmed that he had met Lori at her new house on the morning of May 4th. But when he left, she was still alive and well. He said Lori had plans to go to Albany and he had wished her a safe trip. Doyle's story seemed reasonable, and initially, police found no reason to suspect him. He even agreed to allow police to search his truck without a court order. This was the action of someone who seemingly had nothing to hide. However, during the search of Doyle's truck, police discovered a small detail that would become the key to the entire case. In the glove compartment, they found a key with a serial number engraved on it. At that time, this key had no meaning to the investigators. It was just one of the miscellaneous items that most people have in their cars. Detective Irwin documented the key and preserved it as part of the evidence, despite not knowing this would be the most important piece in the complex puzzle they were trying to solve. The serial number on the key was carefully recorded in the case file, a seemingly unimportant detail that would change the entire course of the investigation. With no specific evidence found against Doyle at that time, police had to expand the search. They interviewed hundreds of people, from Lori's family and friends to strangers who might have seen her in her final days. The investigation became one of the largest efforts ever undertaken by local law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, the Leonard family was living in pain and uncertainty. Jennifer faced the heartbreaking task of explaining to Austin and Zachary why their mother hadn't come home. The two boys, in their childhood innocence, initially hoped their mother would return soon. But as days passed without any news about Lori, the harsh reality began to become clear. Austin, the 9-year-old older son, was old enough to realize that something serious was happening. Zachary, only 5 years old, still hoped their mother would return and asked Jennifer every day when Mom would come home. These innocent questions shattered Jennifer's heart as she was trying to stay strong to care for the children while herself enduring extreme anxiety. The Chittenango community, a small town where everyone knew each other, united to support the Leonard family and participate in the effort to find Lori. Volunteer groups were formed to search in the forest and riverside areas around the town. Flyers with Lori's picture were distributed everywhere, and the community organized prayer meetings and vigils hoping for her safe return. But as weeks passed without any clues about Lori's whereabouts, hope gradually gave way to despair. Family and friends began mentally preparing for the worst possibility, although they continued to hope for a miracle. During this entire time, Sean Doyle continued his normal life in Hudson Falls. He went to work regularly at the ice cream shop, maintained normal social activities, and appeared to be a model citizen. None of his acquaintances suspected that he could be connected to Lori Leonard's mysterious disappearance. However, beneath this normal appearance, Doyle was living with the terrible secret of what had really happened to Lori on the morning of May 4th. He had carefully calculated every step, hoping that his crime would never be discovered. But like many criminals before him, Doyle had underestimated the persistence and skills of the investigators pursuing this case. 3 months after Lori Leonard vanished from the lives of those who loved her, a horrific discovery on the Champlain Canal would bring answers to questions about her fate. But these answers would come at the cost of the painful truth about what one human being could do to another, and about the cruelty that could hide behind an ordinary face. 3 months after Lori Leonard vanished like a gust of wind on July 24, 2005, the metal toolbox discovered floating on the Champlain Canal opened a new nightmare chapter in the investigation. Detective Wade Irwin, who had spent 3 months tirelessly searching for clues about Lori, finally had the answer he never wanted to receive. When the forensic team carefully approached the scene, they faced one of the most horrific sights they had ever witnessed in their careers. Detective Irwin, with over 20 years of experience in law enforcement, later described the scene with haunting details. The victim was handcuffed tightly behind her back, with duct tape wrapped around the handcuffs to ensure perfect restraint. Her legs were also bound together with duct tape, creating a desperate image of complete helplessness. The most terrifying aspect of the entire scene was the victim's face. From the top of her head down to her chin, the entire face had been covered with multiple layers of duct tape, creating a horrific mask that completely concealed the features of this unfortunate woman. When forensic experts proceeded to carefully remove each layer of duct tape to preserve evidence, they discovered that beneath the tape was a bandana tightly knotted in the victim's mouth. The entire body had been carefully wrapped in a familiar-looking blanket, later identified as a blanket from the victim's own bed. This was a particularly cruel detail, showing that the perpetrator had used the victim's most personal belongings to conceal his crime. The toolbox had also been deliberately weighted with multiple sandbags placed around the body, showing meticulous planning to ensure the box would sink to the bottom of the canal and never be found. The medical examiner summoned to the scene conducted a preliminary examination on site before moving the body to the morgue for an official autopsy. The initial findings confirmed the investigators' worst fears. This was not simply a homicide, but the result of prolonged and calculated torture. The official autopsy, conducted by New York State's leading medical examiner, revealed heartbreaking details about Lori Leonard's final moments. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation due to strangulation, a slow and agonizing death. Marks on her neck showed that the victim had been strangled with great force over an extended period, indicating that the perpetrator had enough time to stop but chose to continue until ending Lori's life. Time of death analysis based on decomposition levels and environmental factors showed that Lori had died close to the time of her disappearance, meaning she had been killed in early May, shortly after leaving home for Albany. This eliminated any hope that she might have survived for some time after going missing. While the forensic team was working at the morgue, Detective Irwin and his colleagues returned to the only clue they had: the mysterious key found in Sean Doyle's vehicle 3 months earlier. What had previously been just a minor detail in the search process suddenly became the center of the entire investigation. When Detective Irwin carefully compared the serial number on the key with the lock of the toolbox containing Lori's body, The perfect match created a pivotal moment in the investigation. This wasn't a random coincidence, but direct physical evidence connecting Doyle to this horrific crime. That key was exactly the key that opened the toolbox that had become Lori Leonard's final coffin. With this crucial evidence in hand, investigators had sufficient grounds to request a warrant to search Doyle's entire house. The Washington County judge quickly issued the search warrant after reviewing the evidence presented by prosecutors. The search was meticulously planned and executed with participation from evidence collection experts from the New York State Police. When the search team raided Doyle's house in the early morning, they had prepared for a search that could last many hours. However, what they discovered exceeded their expectations. Doyle's house was like a repository of evidence from the crime he had committed. Detective Irwin described the findings in Doyle's house as a horrific museum of organized violence. They found metal handcuffs identical to the type used to bind Lori. Rolls of duct tape of the same brand and type found on the victim's body were carefully stored in Doyle's storage cabinet. Multiple bandanas with colors and materials similar to the one found in Lori's mouth were discovered in his clothing drawers. Particularly noteworthy was the discovery of multiple sandbags identical to those used to weigh down the toolbox. These sandbags were stored in Doyle's garage, along with other tools showing he had thoroughly prepared for his crime. Each item found was a piece in the overall picture of organized and meticulously calculated cruelty. Additionally, investigators discovered evidence that Doyle had thoroughly researched the terrain and currents of the Champlain Canal. On his computer, they found search histories about the canal's depth, current speeds, and areas with little surveillance. This showed he had planned in detail for disposing of the body and hoped it would never be found. Another particularly important discovery was finding the receipt for purchasing the toolbox from a local auto parts store. The salesperson, a middle-aged woman with a good memory, identified Doyle from photos and confirmed that he had purchased the box in late April, just days before Lori went missing. She remembered this transaction clearly because Doyle had asked specifically about the box's durability and waterproofing, unusual questions for a regular customer. With this mountain of physical evidence, Detective Irwin and his team had sufficient grounds to arrest Sean Doyle. However, they decided to monitor him for several days to ensure he didn't become suspicious and have no opportunity to destroy additional evidence or flee. On the night of July 25th, 2005, exactly one day after Lori's body was discovered, the arrest team went to Doyle's workplace at Ellsworth Ice Cream in Saratoga Springs. They chose this timing to avoid causing disturbance and ensure public safety. When police entered the ice cream shop, Doyle was working the evening shift as usual, serving customers with a fake smile and friendly demeanor. He had no idea that the net had closed around him. Detective Irwin later described the arrest scene as the complete collapse of a mask that had been maintained for 3 months. When informed of the arrest warrant, Doyle neither resisted nor appeared surprised. Instead, he showed a frighteningly calm demeanor, as if he had mentally prepared for this moment long ago. He put his hands behind his back to be handcuffed without saying a word, an attitude that made even seasoned police officers feel uneasy. Doyle was taken to the Washington County Police Station for official questioning. Throughout the transport, he maintained complete silence, looking out the window with an expressionless face. The escorting officers noted that he showed no anxiety, fear, or remorse, normal reactions of an innocent person wrongly arrested or a criminal caught red-handed. At the police station, Doyle was read his Miranda rights and provided with a lawyer. He chose to exercise his right to remain silent and refused to make any statements without the presence of counsel. This was a smart decision from a legal standpoint, but also showed the cold calculation of someone who had prepared for this situation. News of Doyle's arrest spread quickly through the community and reached the Leonard family. Barbara Sloan, Lori's mother, expressed complex emotions upon hearing this news. She said, "We hate what happened, but we're glad these people helped bring Lori home." This was the emotion of a mother who had lost her beloved daughter, but finally had answers about her child's fate. Jeffrey Leonard, Lori's brother, expressed clearer anger when speaking about Doyle. "He's a piece of garbage." He didn't hide his emotions about the person who had cruelly taken his sister's life. Jennifer Leonard, Lori's sister, who had been caring for Austin and Zachary throughout this time, felt relief knowing the perpetrator had finally been caught and couldn't harm anyone else. The Leonard family also expressed deep gratitude for the tireless efforts of law enforcement agencies. This investigation had become one of the largest collaborative efforts between local and state agencies in the region's history. Chief Jeffrey Paul of the Chittenango Police praised the cooperation between Chittenango Police, Washington County Sheriff's Department, New York State Police, and Hudson Falls Police. The investigation had included over 750 interviews conducted systematically across New York State and neighboring states. 280 leads had been meticulously followed, from reports of Lori sightings at various locations to information about suspicious vehicles in the area during the time she went missing. State Police Lieutenant David Krause, who had supervised many aspects of the federal investigation, expressed satisfaction with the results. This is another excellent example of what can be achieved when law enforcement agencies work together and cooperate. He emphasized the importance of sharing information and resources between different agencies. While the Leonard family was trying to process news of the arrest and prepare for upcoming legal challenges, investigators continued working to strengthen the case against Doyle. They knew that obtaining physical evidence was only the first step in a long and complex legal process. Detective Irwin and his team began meticulous work to re-verify every detail of the timeline in the case. They re-interviewed key witnesses, verified Doyle's alibi, and searched for any additional evidence that could strengthen the case. Every phone call, every financial transaction, and every trip Doyle made in the week before and after Lori went missing was thoroughly investigated. An important aspect of the investigation was learning about Doyle's criminal history. When investigators dug deeper into his past, they discovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence. The attack on Cece Opanowski in 1996 was not an isolated incident, but part of a years-long process of cruel development. Doyle's record also revealed the attack on Sarah Volmar in 2000, in which he had used binding methods similar to those found on Lori's body. Volmar had been tied with shoelaces, gagged with duct tape, and strangled until unconscious by Doyle, only saved when her mother intervened in time. This pattern showed that Doyle had perfected his techniques over many years and multiple victims. With the discovery of this criminal behavior pattern, prosecutors realized they weren't just dealing with a single murder, but with a serial offender who had escalated from domestic violence to killing. Washington County District Attorney Kevin Courtright decided that this case would be prosecuted with the maximum severity allowed by law. When news of Doyle's arrest spread through the community, many other women contacted police to report suspicious encounters they had with him in the past. Although not all of these reports led to criminal charges, they painted a picture of a man with a long history of meeting women online and then exhibiting controlling and threatening behavior. The investigation also revealed that Doyle had used multiple identities on dating websites, creating false profiles to hide his criminal history and attract potential victims. He had become an expert at creating the image of a trustworthy and stable man, a skill he had used to deceive Lori Leonard and possibly many other women. With the mountain of physical evidence, witnesses, and clear criminal behavior patterns, the case against Sean Doyle had been built solidly. However, investigators and prosecutors knew they still faced a major challenge ahead: convincing a jury of Doyle's guilt and ensuring that justice would be served for Lori Leonard and her family. The upcoming legal battle would determine whether this perpetrator would pay an appropriate price for the horrific crime he had committed. As winter of 2006 descended upon Washington County, the atmosphere in the county courthouse became tense with preparations for one of the most important trials in local history. Washington County District Attorney Kevin Courtright, a veteran prosecutor with over 15 years of experience, had spent the final months of 2005 building a case he believed would bring justice for Lori Leonard and her family. Courtright understood that despite having a mountain of physical evidence against Doyle, convincing a jury of the cruelty of this crime would require more than just handcuffs and duct tape. He needed to paint a complete picture of Sean Doyle as an organized predator, a man who had spent years perfecting his violent techniques until he finally took the life of an innocent young mother. Courtright's central strategy was to prove Doyle's pattern of criminal behavior through testimony from women who had survived his previous attacks. This required a complex legal decision from the judge about whether to allow evidence of prior bad acts, a type of evidence typically restricted in criminal trials. Courtright spent many weeks researching legal precedents and preparing arguments to convince the judge that testimony from C.C. Opanowski and Sarah Volmar was necessary to establish Doyle's modus operandi, his characteristic method of operation. He argued that the previous attacks showed a clear pattern of using restraints, gagging, and strangulation, exactly the methods used to take Lori Leonard's life. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, C.C. Opanowski was facing the most difficult decision of her life. In the summer of 2005, 9 years after the horrific attack, she had learned that Sean Doyle, now Sean Doyle, had been arrested for murdering a young mother named Lori Leonard. This news had revived all the nightmares she thought had been buried in the past. C.C. shared her emotions when first hearing this news. "I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt for her entire family and her 2 young children." For C.C., this wasn't just news about a criminal case, but confirmation of the secret fears she had harbored for 9 years. The fear that Doyle would hurt someone else and possibly hurt them far worse than what he had done to her. When Courtright contacted C.C. to request her testimony, she initially felt fearful and hesitant. Having to face Doyle in court, having to recount details of the attack in front of a room full of strangers, and having to endure cross-examination from defense attorneys. All of this seemed like an insurmountable challenge. But when C.C. thought about Lori Leonard, a woman she had never met but felt a deep connection to, she found the strength to make her decision. "I need to make sure that he is locked up for taking Lori's life," C.C. said. "At this point now, I'm angry. I'm not fearful." This was an important transformation in C.C.'s mindset. From a victim living in fear to a witness determined to demand justice. Preparing for C.C.'s testimony required professional psychological support and many practice sessions with the prosecution team. Courtright understood that C.C. would face difficult questions from defense attorneys, who would try to question the reliability of her memory after 9 years, her motives for testifying, and specific details of the 1996 attack. Meanwhile, investigators were also working with Sarah Volmar, the woman who had been attacked by Doyle in 2000. Volmar had agreed to share her story with local television station WRGB in 2005, describing how Doyle had tied me up with shoelaces, put duct tape over my mouth, and then just began strangling me until I passed out. Fortunately, Volmar's mother had intervened in time and saved her daughter's life. The official trial began on January 23, 2006, in a tense atmosphere at the Washington County Courthouse. The judge decided to allow testimony from both C.C. Opanowski and Sarah Volmar, recognizing that the previous attack showed a sufficiently distinctive crime pattern to establish Doyle's motive and identity as Lori Leonard's killer. The courtroom was filled with Leonard family members, friends, media representatives, and citizens concerned about the case. Jennifer Leonard, Lori's sister, sat in the front row with Austin and Zachary beside her. The 2 boys, now a year older since their mother went missing, were still too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to sense the serious atmosphere around them. Courtright opened the case with a powerful opening statement, painting a picture of Doyle as an organized predator who had spent years perfecting his techniques. He described how Doyle used the internet to seek vulnerable victims, how he built trust only to brutally break it, and how he had evolved from attacking and threatening to actually taking someone's life. Doyle's defense attorneys tried to build a strategy based on questioning the reliability of evidence and creating reasonable doubt about their client's guilt. However, they faced an overwhelming mountain of physical evidence. The key from Doyle's car matched the toolbox lock, items from his house were identical to those used on the victim, and the receipt for purchasing the toolbox just days before Lori went missing. In the first week of the trial, prosecutors systematically presented physical evidence. Detective Wade Irwin recounted the process of discovering the body and the investigative steps leading to Doyle's arrest. The medical examiner described the cause of death and condition of the body when found. The salesperson from the auto parts store confirmed Doyle's purchase of the toolbox. But the pivotal moment of the trial came when Courtright called his final witness. Following the strategy of always save the best for last, he had reserved Cece Opanowski's testimony for the end, knowing her story would create the strongest impact on the jury. When Cece entered the courtroom, the atmosphere became noticeably silent. This was the first time in 9 years she had to face the man who had brutally attacked her. Doyle sat at the defendant's table, expressionless, looking straight ahead as if Cece didn't exist. Cece, now a 27-year-old woman who had grown much stronger and more mature than the 18-year-old girl who had been attacked, recounted her story with a steady and clear voice. She described in detail the 1996 attack, how Doyle had deceived his way into the house, how he had pushed her onto the sofa, beaten her against the French doors, cut her hair with scissors, and strangled her while holding scissors near her neck. The most important part of the testimony was when Cece described how she had used her intelligence to call for help through the phone call with Shannon McAuliffe. She explained how she had continuously used the word no to signal danger, and how Shannon had understood that signal. This story showed not only Doyle's cruelty, but also Cece's courage and intelligence in extremely dangerous circumstances. During cross-examination, defense attorneys tried to question the accuracy of Cece's memory after 9 years and her motives for testifying. However, Cece answered steadfastly and consistently, not allowing herself to be swayed by difficult questions. She emphasized that her sole purpose was to ensure that Doyle was held responsible for taking Lori Leonard's life. Sarah Volmar also testified about the 2000 attack, describing how Doyle had used similar methods, tying with laces, gagging with duct tape, and strangling until she lost consciousness. Her testimony further reinforced Doyle's behavioral pattern and showed the escalation in his level of violence over time. After 3 days of trial, representatives from both sides presented their closing arguments. Courtright concluded his case by reiterating all evidence against Doyle and emphasizing that this was not an impulsive act, but the result of years of developing violent tendencies. He called upon the jury to find Doyle guilty of second-degree murder. Defense attorneys made a final effort to create reasonable doubt, arguing that circumstantial evidence was insufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. However, faced with the mountain of physical evidence and compelling witness testimony, this argument seemed to have little effect on the jury. On January 26, 2006, after several hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with their verdict. The jury foreman read aloud, "Guilty of second-degree murder." The sounds of relieved sighs and quiet sobs from the Leonard family filled the courtroom. Doyle showed no reaction upon hearing the verdict. He continued sitting with an expressionless face, as if this result had nothing to do with him. This coldness made many people in the courtroom feel even more uneasy about his true nature. The judge scheduled the sentencing hearing for a month later, allowing the victim's family to prepare impact statements and lawyers from both sides to prepare arguments about appropriate sentencing. In the month between verdict and sentencing, the Leonard family prepared profound impact statements about how losing Lori had affected their lives. Austin and Zachary, though still too young to attend the trial directly, wrote moving letters to the judge. Austin, now 10 years old, wrote, "She let me sleep with her when I was scared and when I hear something scary. We used to sing songs we liked the most together. I think my mom was the greatest mom in the world. These words expressed a child's pure love for his mother and the enormous loss he was enduring. Zachary, now 6 years old, wrote with the painful innocence of childhood. My mom, my brother, and I had really great times together. I'm also sad because I will never see my mom anymore now because of what happened. These simple words summarize the entire tragedy. Two small children having to grow up without their mother because of one man's cruel actions. Jennifer Leonard also prepared a long and moving statement about her sister. She described Lori as so fun, so funny, so loving, and shared the dreams they had about raising children together and growing old together. We were supposed to be living in the same place and going out and raising our kids and having parties, and that's what it was supposed to be, Jennifer said. And now it's just me and the kids trying to get along without her. The final sentencing day arrived, and the courtroom was once again filled with family, friends, and those concerned about the case. The judge listened to the family's impact statements with seriousness and deep sympathy. Then he announced the maximum sentence allowed by law, 25 years to life at Elmira State Correctional Institution, with the possibility of parole consideration after 25 years. Although this was the heaviest possible sentence, many Leonard family members still felt unsatisfied. Jennifer Leonard expressed, "I didn't think so. You don't want him getting out. No, there's no forgiveness. No way, man, none. He's a danger to society, and I hope he never gets out." Dorothy Tucker, who had initially supported Doyle, now felt completely betrayed. She said, "He lied straight to my face. And here is someone that I trusted, thought I knew. Never saw that side of him." Tucker also apologized to the Leonard family for how she had treated them when they came to Hudson Falls to rally against Doyle. "I wanted to tell them how sorry I was, and I still am. That was totally uncalled for, and it was unacceptable behavior on my part." In the years that followed, Doyle appealed his conviction to the Appellate Division of State Supreme Court. However, the appeals court rejected his appeal, declaring there was sufficient evidence to support the conviction. In their decision, the appeals court noted Doyle's behavior in prison, including possession of gang-related items such as a bracelet with a 1%er symbol, a term used by outlaw motorcycle gangs. A prison gang expert's report determined that Doyle's gang-related materials provide substantial evidence to support the determination of guilt in a separate disciplinary violation. This showed that even in prison, Doyle continued to exhibit illegal and dangerous behaviors. Don Lehman, a reporter who had covered many domestic violence cases in nearly 30 years of his career, drew important lessons from this case. "Every case of domestic violence is a potential homicide," he said. "They all have to be taken seriously. They all have to be handled in a way to protect these victims." Lehman also emphasized the broader impact of this crime. "As a young woman with 2 young kids, it's just mind-boggling that these kids lost their mom to a guy like this." These words encapsulated the entire tragedy, not just Lori's death, but the long-term impact on 2 children who would have to grow up without their mother. Cece Opanowski, who had shown extraordinary courage in facing her attacker in court, was finally ready to let go of the guilt she had carried for 20 years. "I've waited so long and I've had to live with it for all of these years," she said. She also shared important advice for others who might face similar situations. "Be vigilant," Cece advised. "Look at what's happening in front of you and make sure someone knows. Don't keep it quiet. Pay attention, and when you have that feeling, that one that doesn't go away, the one that you try to push down, that's the one you should listen to the most." These words became an important message for anyone who might be experiencing violence or threats. Jennifer Leonard, in an effort to honor her sister's memory, shared how she wanted Lori to be remembered. "Lori Ann, so fun, so funny, so loving." This was the image the family wanted people to remember about Lori, not as a victim of crime, but as a loving mother, a wonderful sister, and a woman full of life and hope. For Jennifer, the pain of losing her sister wasn't just about the present, but about everything they would never have together. We were supposed to be living in the same place and going out and raising our kids and having parties, and that's what it was supposed to be, she said with pain in her voice. That's what we were supposed to have, and now it's just me and the kids trying to get along without her. Zachary, now more grown up, when asked what he missed most about his mother, answered with simple honesty. In moments where I'm really sad, where I'm like, I just need her to hold me, and she hasn't been able to do that in 20 years. These words express the profound pain of growing up without a mother's love and comfort. Sean Doyle continues serving his sentence at a New York State correctional facility and will be eligible for parole consideration in 2030. However, given his history of violence, disciplinary violations in prison, and the severity of his crime, the likelihood of his receiving parole is very low. The Lori Leonard case became an important cautionary tale about the dangers of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing early warning signs. It also emphasized the crucial role of survivors in demanding justice and preventing future crimes. This story doesn't just end with Doyle's conviction, but also with important lessons about the power of friendship, as demonstrated through Shannon McAuliffe's actions, the importance of trusting one's instincts, and humanity's capacity to find strength to face trauma and demand justice. For the Leonard family, the journey toward healing continues. However, knowing that the person who took Lori's life is paying the price for his actions, they can begin to find some peace within their pain. And for Cece Opanowski, speaking out and demanding justice brought her liberation after 2 decades of living in fear and guilt. The story of Lori Leonard and the fight for justice for her will continue to be remembered as a testament to the strength of courageous women who refuse to let violence prevail, and as a reminder that sometimes justice may come late, but when it arrives, it can bring healing and hope to those who have been wounded.